please the tribunal. Lieutenant Colonel Griffith-Jones of the British delegation will now deal with the individual responsibility of the defendant Streicher.
If the tribunal pleases, it is my duty to present the case against the defendant, Julius Streicher. The Appendix A of the indictment, that paragraph of the appendix relating to Streicher, sets out the positions which he held and which I shall prove, and it then goes on to allege that he used those positions, his personal influence, and his close connection with the Führer in such a manner that he promoted to power, that he promoted the accession to power of the Nazi conspirators and the consolidation of their control over Germany as set forth in count 1 of the indictment, that he authorized, directed, and participated in the crimes against humanity set forth in count 4 of the indictment, including particularly the incitement of the persecution of the Jews set forth in count 1 and count 4 of the indictment. My Lord, the case against this defendant can be perhaps described by the unofficial title that he assumed for himself as Jew baiter number 1. And it is the prosecution's case that for the course of some 25 years, this man educated the whole of the German people in hatred, and that he incited them to the persecution and to the extermination of the Jewish race. He was an accessory to murder, perhaps on a scale never attained before. With the tribunal's permission, I propose to prove quite shortly the positions and influence that he held, and then to refer the tribunal to several short extracts from his newspapers and from his speeches, and to outline the part that he played in the particular persecutions that occurred against the Jews between the years 1933 and 1945. My Lord, perhaps before I start, I might say that the document book before the members of the tribunal is arranged in the order in which I intend to refer to the documents. They are paged, and there is an index at the beginning of the book. And if the tribunal have got what is called the trial brief, it is in effect a note of the evidence to which I shall refer, and again in the order in which I shall refer to it, which may be of some assistance. My Lord, this defendant was born in 1885. He became a school teacher in Nuremberg and formed a party of his own, which he called the German Socialist Party. The chief policy of that party, again, was anti-Semitism. In 1922, he handed over his party to Hitler, and there is a glowing account of his generosity, which appears in Hitler's Mein Kampf, which I don't think is worth occupying the time in reading. It appears as M3 and is the first document in the tribunal's document books. The copy of Mein Kampf is already before the tribunal as GB 128. the appointments that he held in the party and state were few. From 1921 until 1945, he was a member of the Nazi Party. In 1925, he was appointed Gauleiter of Franconia, and he remained as such until about February of 1940. And from the time that the Nazi government came into power, 1933 until 1945, he was a member of the Reichstag. In addition to that, he held the title of Obergruppenführer in the SA. All that information appears in PS 2975, which is already exhibited as US 9 and is the affidavit that he made himself. The propaganda that he carried out throughout those years was chiefly done through the medium of his newspapers. He was the editor and publisher of a paper called Der Stürmer, which was a weekly paper, and he was editor and publisher of that journal from 1922 until 1933, and thereafter the publisher and owner of the paper. In 1933, he also founded and thereafter, I think published, certainly was responsible for, the newspaper, daily newspaper called the Frankfurter Tageszeitung. There were, in addition to that, and particularly later, several other, mostly local journals that he published from Nuremberg. Those then are the positions that he held. And now, if I might quite briefly trace the course of his incitement and propaganda, more or less in chronological order, by referring the tribunal to the short extracts. I would say this: these extracts are really selected at random. They are selected with a view to showing the tribunal the various methods that he employed to incite the people against the Jewish race. But his newspapers are crowded with them, week after week, day after day. It is impossible to pick up any copy without finding the same kind of stuff in the headlines and in the articles. If I might quote from 4 speeches and articles showing his early activities from 1922 until 1933, at page 3 of the tribunal's document book, M11, that is an extract from a speech that he made in 1922 in Nuremberg. And after abusing the Jews in the first paragraph, I only refer to the last 2 lines. We know that Germany will be free when the Jew has been excluded from the life of the German people. I pass to the next document, which is M12, on page 4. I ought to have given that the first document was GB 165. Is that the book? That is the book, I understand, has been given that number, so that the next document, which is taken from the same book, will be the same. Perhaps I might be allowed to read that short extract. It's an extract from a speech. I beg you, and particularly those of you who carry the cross throughout the land, to become somewhat more serious when I speak of the enemy of the German people, namely the Jew. Not out of irresponsibility or for fun do I fight against the Jewish enemy, but because I bear within me the knowledge that the whole misfortune was brought to Germany by the Jews alone. I ask you once more, what is at stake today? The Jew seeks dominion not only among the German people, but among all peoples. The communists pave the way for him. Do you know that the God of the Old Testament orders the Jews to consume and enslave the peoples of the earth? The government allows the Jew to do as he pleases. The people expects action to be taken. You may think about Adolf Hitler as you please, but one thing you must admit, he possessed the courage to attempt to free the German people from the Jew by a national revolution. That was action indeed. And the next short extract appearing on the next page is taken from a speech in April 1925. You must realize that the Jew wants our people to perish. That is why you must join us and leave those who have brought you nothing but war and inflation and discord. For thousands of years, the Jew has been destroying the nations. I ask the tribunal to note now these last few words. Let us make a new beginning today so that we can annihilate the Jew. My Lord, so far as I have been able to find, that is the earliest expression of annihilation of the Jewish race. Perhaps it gave birth to what was 14 years later to become the official policy of the Nazi government. And one further passage from this period. This is in April 32, M14. It's taken from the same book. And he starts by saying, for 13 years, I have fought against Jewry. I quote the last paragraph only. We know that the Jew, whether he is baptized as a Protestant or a Catholic, remains a Jew. Why cannot you realize, you Protestant clergymen, you Catholic priests, you who have scales before your eyes and serve the God of the Jews, who is not the God of love but the God of hate? Why do you not listen to Christ, who said to the Jews, you are the children of the devil? That then was the kind of performance he was putting up during those early years. When the Nazi Party came to power, they officially started their campaign against the Jews by the boycott of the 1st of April 1933. Now, of that boycott, the tribunal have already had evidence, and I would do no more now than to remind the tribunal in a word what happened. The boycott was agreed and approved of by the whole government, as was shown in a document which is already before you, PS 2409, US 262. Which was Goebbels' diary. Streicher was appointed the chairman of the Central Committee for the organization of that boycott. which appears in document 2156 PS US 263. And it was then said that he started his work on Wednesday the 29th. On that same day, the Central Committee issued a proclamation in which they said that the boycott would start at Saturday at 10 a.m. sharp. Jury will realize whom it has challenged. And that short quotation appears in a document PS 3387, which is US 566, which is a volume. In actual fact, it's one of the disjurmers which is already before the court. I would refer the tribunal to one short passage from a speech that the defendant Streicher made on the 30th of March, the day before the boycott was due to start. I beg your pardon, it's an article in the National Socialist Party Correspondence. It's PS 2153 and appears on page 12 of the tribunal's book, which becomes GB 166. There he writes under the title "Defeat the Enemy of the World" by Julius Streicher, leader of the Central Committee to combat the Jewish atrocity and boycott campaign. Jury wanted this battle. It shall have it until it realizes that the Germany of the brown battalions is not a country of cowardice and surrender. Jury will have to fight until we have won victory. National Socialists, defeat the enemy of the world. Even if the world is full of devils, we shall succeed in the end. As head of the Central Committee for that boycott, Streicher outlined in detail the organization of the boycott in orders which the committee published on the 31st of March 1933, which is the next document in the book, PS 2154, GB 167. I can summarize those. The committee stressed that no violence is to be employed against the Jews on the occasion of that boycott, but not perhaps for any humane reasons. It is because if there is no violence employed, then employers will have no grounds for discharging. Jewish employers will have no grounds for discharging their employees without notice, and they will have no grounds for refusing to pay them any wages. The Jews were also reported apparently to be transferring businesses to German figureheads in order to alleviate the results of this persecution, and the committee laid it down that any property so transferred was to be considered as Jewish for the purpose of the boycott. I don't think I need go into that any further. It does show that at that date he was taking a leading part, and a leading part as appointed by the government in the persecution against the Jews. I would now refer the court again to a few further extracts to show the form that this propaganda developed as the years went on. At page 18 of the document book, we have an article in the New Year's issue of a new paper that he had just founded. It was a semi-medical paper called The People's Health Through Blood and Soil, edited by himself. And it's an example of the really remarkable lengths to which he went in putting over this propaganda against the Jew. I quote, "It is established for all eternity. Alien albumen is the sperm of a man of alien race. The male sperm, in cohabitation, is partially or completely absorbed by the female and thus enters her bloodstream. One single cohabitation of a Jew with an Aryan woman is sufficient to poison her blood forever. Together with the alien albumen, she has absorbed the alien soul. Never again will she be able to bear purely Aryan children, even when married to an Aryan. They will all be bastards, with a dual soul and the body of a mixed breed. Their children will be crossbeds. That means ugly people of unsteady character and with a tendency to illnesses. Now we know why the Jew uses every artifice of seduction in order to ravish German girls at as early an age as possible. Why the Jewish doctor rapes his patients while they are under anesthetic. He wants the German girl and the German woman to absorb the alien sperm of a Jew. She is never again to bear German children. But the blood products of all animals, right down to the bacteria, like the serum, lymph, extracts from internal organs, etc., are also alien albumin. They have a poisonous effect if directly introduced into the bloodstream, either by vaccination or by injection. By these products of sick animals, the blood is ravished, the Aryan is impregnated with an alien species. The author and abettor of such action is the Jew. He has been aware of the secrets of the race question for centuries, and therefore plans systematically the annihilation of the nations which are superior to him. Science and authorities are his instruments for the enforcing of pseudo-science and the concealment of truth. That becomes, my Lord, GB 168. Next document, also at the beginning of 1935, an extract from his own paper, the Der Stürmer, entitled The Chosen People of the Criminal. And all the same, or let us say, just because of this, the history book of the Jews, which is usually called the Holy Scriptures, impresses us as a horrible criminal romance, which makes the 150 penny dreadfuls of the British Jew, Edgar Wallace, go green with envy. This holy book abounds in murder, incest, fraud, theft, and indecency. In a speech on the 4th of October 1935, and the tribunal will remember that that was the month after the Nuremberg decrees had been made, he made a speech which is reported in the Volkischer Beobachter and entitled in that newspaper, Safeguard of German Blood and German Honor. Gauleiter, I read the report in that article, Gauleiter Streicher speaks at a German Labor Front mass demonstration for the Nuremberg laws. Then in the first line of the actual article, it says that he spoke for the second time within a few weeks. I quote only the last two lines of that first large paragraph. We have, therefore, to unmask the Jew. And that is what I have been doing for the past 15 years. That remark apparently was met with tempestuous applause. And that becomes GB 169. Lord, I think it unnecessary to quote from the next document in the tribunal's book. It's very much the same type of thing. On page 22 of the document book, M7, there is a leading article by Streicher in his Disjurma, of which I would refer only to the last half of the last paragraph, where again he emphasizes the part that he himself has taken in this campaign. The Disjurma's 15 years of work of enlightenment has already led an army of those who know, millions strong, to National Socialism. The continued work of the Stürmer will help to ensure that every German, down to the last man, will, with heart and hand, join the ranks of those whose aim it is to crush the head of the serpent Pan-Judah beneath their heels. He who helps to bring this about helps to eliminate the devil, and this devil is the Jew. That document becomes GB 170. The next document I only included in the document book, again to show the extraordinary lengths to which he went in his propaganda, and it consists of a photograph of the burning hull of the airship Hindenburg when it went on fire in June 1937 in America. And underneath it, the caption includes the comment, "The first radio picture from the United States of America shows quite clearly that a Jew stands behind the explosion of our airship Hindenburg. Nature has depicted quite clearly and quite correctly that devil in human guise. And although it isn't at all clear from that photograph, I think the meaning of that comment is that the cloud of smoke in the air is in the shape of a Jewish face." On the next page, a speech he made in September 1937 at the opening of a bridge in Nuremberg. I would quote only the last paragraph of page 24. The bridge in question is called the Wilhelm Gustloff Bridge, and he says, "The man who murdered Wilhelm Gustloff had to come from the Jewish people because the Jewish textbooks teach that every Jew has the right to kill a non-Jew, and indeed that it is pleasing to the Jewish God to kill as many non-Jews as possible. Look at the way the Jewish people have been following for thousands of years past. Everywhere murder, everywhere mass murder. Neither must we forget that behind present-day wars there stands the Jewish financier who pursues his aims and interests. The Jew always lives on the blood of other nations. He needs such murder and such victims. For us who know, the murder of Wilhelm Gustloff is the same as ritual murder." And then on the next page, we must tell our children. It is the duty to tell the children at school and the bigger ones what this memorial means. I go to the next paragraph. The Jew no longer shows himself among us openly as he used to, but it would be wrong to say that victory is ours. Full and final victory will have been achieved only when the whole world has been rid of Jews. That becomes GB 171. Now, the next two documents in your document books are simply extracts from the correspondence columns of his Streicher, showing again one of the methods he employed in this propaganda. I don't need to read them. The correspondence columns of all his issues are full of letters coming in from Germans saying that some German has been buying her shoes from a Jewish shop and so on, and in that way assisting in the general boycott of the Jews. In other words, they really are a column of libel against a weekly column of libels against the Jews all over Germany. I pass then to another and particular form of propaganda that he employed and which he called ritual murder. And the tribunal may well remember that some years ago, I think it started in 1934, this Streicher began publishing accounts of Jewish ritual murder, which horrified the whole world to such an extent that even the Archbishop of Canterbury eventually wrote to the Times, protesting, as indeed did people from every country in the world, protesting that any government should allow matter like this to be published in their national newspapers. He takes his ritual murder, I understand, from a medieval belief that during their Eastertide celebrations, the Jews were in the habit of murdering Christian children. And he enlarges upon this and misrepresents this belief, this medieval belief, to show that not only did they do it in the Middle Ages, but that they are still doing it and still want to do it. And if I might just quote one or two passages from his newspapers and show one or two pictures which he published in connection with his campaign of ritual murder, it will illustrate to the court the type of teaching and propaganda that he was putting out. On page 29 of the tribunal's document book, I would quote from the third but last paragraph. This the French frontline soldier should take with him to France. The German people have taken a new lease of life. They want peace, but if anybody tries to attack them, if anyone tries to torture them again, if anyone tries to push them back into the past, then the world would see another heroic epic. Then heaven will decide where righteousness lies, here or where the Jew has the whip hand, and where he instigates massacres. One could almost say the biggest ritual murders of all time. If the German people are to be slaughtered according to the Jewish rites, the whole world will be thus slaughtered at the same time. And the last paragraph, as you have drummed morning and evening prayers into your children's heads, so now drum this into their heads. so that the German people may gain the spiritual power to convince the rest of the world which the Jews desire to lead against us. And on the following page of the document book, there is a reproduction of a photograph taken from the Stürmer of April 1937, which illustrates 3 Jews ritually murdering a girl by cutting her throat, and shows the blood pouring out into a bucket on the ground. The caption underneath that photograph is as follows: "Ritual murder at Polna. A ritual murder of Agnes Harutza by the Jews Pilsner, Erdmann, and Wassermann." Contemporary, taken from a contemporary postcard. That was GB. I'm afraid I'd rather run away from M2, which was appeared on page 29 of the document book, was GB 172, and the illustration on page 30 is US 258. It is already in a copy of the Stürmer which has been put in. There appears on the next page of the document book an extract from that same Stürmer of April 37. I will not read it now because it has been put in and it has all been read to the court. It describes what happens when ritual murder takes place and the blood is mixed with the bread and drunk by the Jews having their feast. And the tribunal will remember that during the feast, the head of the family exclaims, "May all Gentiles perish as the Jew whose blood is contained in the bread and wine." That is already US 258, and it appears, it has been read in the transcript at page 1437.
Would that be a good time to break out?
Yes, Your Lordship, please. May I please, Tribunal, if I might just refer to 2 further copies of the Stürmer on the subject of ritual murder. The first of which appears at page 32 of the document book, PS 2700, which becomes, it is already, I think, the copy is in as 260 US. Stürmer for July 1938. Whoever had the occasion to be an eyewitness during the slaughtering of animals, or to see at least a truthful film on the slaughtering, will never forget this horrible experience. It is atrocious. And unwillingly, he is reminded of the crimes which the Jews have committed for centuries on men. He will be reminded of the ritual murder. History points out hundreds of cases in which non-Jewish children were tortured to death. They also were given the same incision through the throat as is found on slaughtered animals. They also were slowly bled to death while fully conscious. My Lord, on special occasions, or when he had some particular subject matter to put before the world, he was in the habit of issuing special editions of his newspaper, Der Stürmer. Ritual murder was such a special subject that he issued one of these special editions dealing solely with it. The tribunal have a photostat copy of the complete issue for May 1939. Now, I have not attempted to have translated all or indeed any of the articles which appear in that edition. It is perhaps sufficient to look at the pictures, the illustrations, and for me to read the captions which appear underneath each of them. And I regret that the translation to the captions has not been attached to the tribunal's copy, but perhaps I may be permitted to refer to the pictures and read the captions for the tribunal. On page 1, and the pages are marked in red pencil at the right top-hand corner. On page 1, we see a picture of a child having knives stuck into its sides, blood spurting from it, and below the pedestal on which it stands are 5 presumably dead children lying on the ground. The caption to that picture is as follows. In the year 1476, the Jews in Regensburg murdered 6 boys. They drew their blood and tortured them to death. In an underground vault, which belonged to the Jew Joseph, the judges found the bodies of the murdered boys. A blood-stained stone bowl stood on an altar. On the next page, there are 2 pictures, and the captions explain them. The one at the top-hand, left-hand corner, for the Jewish New Year celebrations 1913, World Jury published this picture. On the Jewish New Year and the Day of Atonement, the Jews slaughter a so-called Kapores cock, that is to say dead cock, whose blood and death is intended to purify the Jews. In 1913, the Kapores cock had the head of the Russian Tsar Nicholas II. By publishing this postcard, the Jews intended to say that Nicholas II would be their next purifying and slaughter sacrifice. On the 16th of July 1918, the Tsar was murdered by the Jews Shurovsky and Golosh-Teshkin. The picture at the bottom of the page, again, has Jews holding a similar bird. The Kapores cock has the head of the Führer. The Hebrew script says that one day the Jews will kill all Hitlerites. Then they, the Jews, will be delivered from all misfortune. But in due course, the Jews will realize that they have reckoned without Adolf Hitler. The next page of the newspaper contains the pictures, reproductions of a lot of previous articles on ritual murder, with a picture of the defendant Julius Streicher at the top. On the 4th page, a picture at the bottom of the right-hand corner has the caption, Jew at the Passover meal. The wine and mazot, unleavened bread, contains non-Jewish blood. The Jew prays before the meal. He prays for death to all non-Jews. On the 5th page are reproductions from some of the European and American newspaper articles and letters which had been received by those newspapers during the course of the last years in protest to this propaganda on the subject of ritual murder. And in the center of it, you will see the letter from the Archbishop of Canterbury written to the editor of the Times in protest. On the next page, page 6, is another ghastly picture of a man having his throat cut, again the usual spurts of blood falling into a basin on the floor, and the caption to that picture is as follows: "The ritual murder of the boy Heinrich. In the year 1345, the Jews in Munich slaughtered a non-Jewish boy. The martyr was declared holy by the church." On page 6, on page 7, appears another picture, the Holy Gabriel. This boy was crucified and tortured to death by the Jews in the year 1690. The blood was drawn off him. Oh, I'm so sorry. The caption that I read then was in respect of the photograph on page 8 and not on page 7. The picture on page 7 is said to represent pre-ritual murders. I think we can pass page 9 and page 10. On page 11, there is shown a piece of sculpture which appears on the wall of the Wolfart Chapel in Wesel, and it represents the ritual murder of a boy, Werner. Somewhat disgusting picture of the boy strung up by his feet and being murdered by two Jews. Page 12 reproduces another picture taken from the same place. The caption is "The embalmed body of Simon of Trion, who was tortured to death by the Jews." Page 13 has another picture, somebody else having a knife stuck into him, more blood coming out into more bone. On page 14 are two pictures. The one at the top is said to be the ritual murder of the boy Andreas, and the one at the bottom is the picture of a tombstone, the caption of which reads as follows: "Tombstone of Hilsner. This is the memorial to the Jewish ritual murderer Leopold Hilsner. He was found guilty of 2 ritual murders and was condemned to death by hanging in 2 trials. The emperor was bribed and pardoned him. Masaryk, the friend of the Jews, liberated him from penal servitude in 1918. Even on his tombstone, the lying jury calls this twofold murderer an innocent victim." The next page again produces the picture of a woman being murdered by having her throat cut in the same way. And the last page of all, or perhaps I might refer to page 17, which reproduces a picture of the Archbishop of Canterbury, and a picture by him of an old Jewish man, and the caption says, "Dr. Lang, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the highest dignitary of the English Church, and his allies, a typical example of the Jewish race. And the last page, page 18, produces a picture called Holy Simon, who was tortured to death. My Lord, it is my submission that that document is nothing but an incitement to the people who read it of Germany, an incitement to murder. It is filled with pictures of murder, murder alleged to be against the German people, and is an encouragement to all who read it to revenge themselves, and revenge themselves in the same way. That document becomes GB 173.
Rechtsanwalt Dr. Marx, Verteidiger des Angeklagten Julius Streicher. Der Angeklagte Julius Streicher macht mich eben darauf aufmerksam, dass ihm bisher noch keine Möglichkeit gegeben war, nachzuweisen, woher diese Bilder, auf die eben die Anklage Bezug genommen hat, entnommen sind. Es ist nach Ansicht der Verteidigung notwendig, dass der Ursprung dieser Bilder, dieser Abbildungen dem Gerichte klar gemacht wird. Es könnte ja sonst die Meinung entstehen, dass diese Bilder eigens für den Stürmer aus irgendeiner dunklen Quelle entnommen seien. Der Angeklagte Streicher weist aber darauf hin, dass diese Bilder aus anerkannten Geschichtsquellen geflossen sind. Ich möchte mir daher die Anregung erlauben, die Anklagebehörde zu veranlassen, dieses Material ebenfalls mit zur Verfügung zu stellen. Aus den Artikeln des Stürmers, auf die Bezug genommen worden ist, müsste sich meines Erachtens ergeben, was die Quellen sind, aus denen der Angeklagte Streicher geschöpft hat.
Do the articles show the sources? Do the articles themselves indicate the sources?
Ja. Nach der Behauptung des Angeklagten Streicher, ja.
Can you tell us?
Well, I should have said so. It wasn't to any intention to misrepresent the matter. These pictures are taken from original pictures. They're not invented by this newspaper, and in some cases the sources are shown in the caption. This is a collection of pictures, medieval pictures, and frescoes dealing with this matter. In actual fact, the paper shows in almost all cases where they come from. My Lord, in January 1938, and it will be remembered that in 1938 the persecution of the Jews became more and more severe. In January 38, for some reason or another, another special issue of the Der Stürmer was published. If the tribunal would look at page 34 of their document book, I would quote a short passage from the leading article in that paper, an article written by the defendant. The supreme aim and the highest task of the state is therefore to conserve people, blood, and race. But if this is the supreme task, any crime against this law must be punished with the supreme penalty. The Stürmer takes therefore the view that there are only two punishments for the crime of polluting the race: penal servitude for life for attempted race pollution, death for committing race pollution. And again, indeed, if it's now still necessary to show the type of paper this was, if the tribunal would turn over to the next page, you will see the headlines set out for some of the articles that are contained in that edition. Jewish race polluters at work. The next one. 15-years-old non-Jewish ravage. The next one. A dangerous race polluter. He regards German women as fair game for himself. The next one. The Jewish Sanatorium, a Jewish institution for the cultivation of race pollution. The next one. Rape of a feeble-minded girl. And lastly, the Jewish butler. He steals from his Jewish masters and commits race pollution. That is already in, or the copy of the paper is in, as US 260. The next page of the document book, I would quote only the last two lines. It is an article appearing in the Stürmer, and it's true that it is not an article actually written by the defendant Streicher, but by his then editor, Karl Holtz. The revenge will break loose one day and will exterminate Jewry from the face of the earth. And again, on page 37, in September 1938, the Stürmer was writing an article in which the last two lines read as follows: a parasite, this is in reference to the Jews, a parasite, an enemy, an evildoer, a disseminator of diseases, who must be destroyed in the interest of mankind. It is my submission to the tribunal that this is no longer propaganda for the persecution of Jews. This is propaganda for the extermination of Jews, for the murder, not of one man, but of millions. The next document in the document book, on page 38, has already been put in evidence and read to the tribunal. It is US 260. It appears in document book T and is read into the transcript at page 1438. That is a short article appearing in December 1938, number 50 of the De Stürmer. I would draw the tribunal's attention again to the next document, which is a picture taken from that same copy. It shows the upper part of a girl's body being strangled by the arms of a man with his hands round her neck, and the shadow of the man's face is shown against the background, quite obviously with Jewish features. The caption under that picture is as follows: castration for castration for race polluters. Only heavy penalties will preserve our women folk from a tighter grip from the ghastly Jewish claws. The Jews are our misfortune. I pass for the moment from the De Stürmer to a particular incident that occurred in which the defendant Streicher took a leading part. It will be remembered that the organized demonstrations against the Jews took place in November, the 9th and 10th of November, 1938. All this propaganda, as I say, was becoming fiercer and more ferocious. And in August of that year, the defendant Streicher organized the breaking up of the Nuremberg synagogue on the occasion of a meeting of press representatives in Nuremberg. That incident has in fact been referred to previously in this case, and the documents in connection with it are PS 1724, which was put in as US 266 and is referred to and read in the transcript at page 1443. Under that, Gauleiter Julius Streicher was personally to set the crane in motion with which the Jewish symbols will be torn down from the synagogue. And another document which was also put in, PS 2711, which became US 267 and was read into the transcript at page 1443 also. I quote two lines from it. "The synagogue is being demolished!" exclamation mark. Julius Streicher himself inaugurates the work by a speech lasting an hour and a half. By his order, then, so to speak, as a prelude to the demolition, the tremendous Star of David came off the cupola. The defendant, of course, took part, and an active part, in the November demonstrations of that year. I do not suggest that he was responsible for the idea of them. The evidence against him is confined only to the part that he took in his Gau of Franconia. On page 43 of the document book is an account of the Nuremberg demonstrations as they were reported in the Frankische Tageszeitung, which of course was his paper, on the 11th of November. I quote, "In Nuremberg and Fürth, it resulted in demonstrations by the crowd against the Jewish murderers. These lasted until the early hours of the morning. Far too long had one watched the activities of the Jews in Germany." And then I go to the last three lines of that paragraph. "After midnight, the excitement of the populace reached its peak, and a large crowd marched to the synagogues in Nuremberg and Fürth and burned these two Jewish buildings where the murder of Germans had been preached. The fire brigades, which had been notified immediately, saw to it that the fire was confined to its original outbreak. The windows of Jewish shopkeepers, who still had not given up hope of selling their junk to the stupid goyim, were smashed. Thanks to the disciplined behavior of the SA men and the police, who rushed to the scene, there was no plundering." That becomes GB 174. And the following document in the document book is the report of Streicher's speech on the 10th of November, the day of the demonstrations. I would quote two paragraphs from that page, or rather, starting in the middle of the first paragraph, from the cradle, the Jew is not being taught, like we are, such texts as "Thou shalt love your neighbor as thyself," or "If you are smitten on the left cheek, offer then your right one." No, he is told, with the non-Jew, you can do whatever you like. He is even taught that the slaughtering of a non-Jew is an act pleasing to God. For 20 years we have been writing about this in the Stürmer. For 20 years we have been preaching it throughout the world. And we have millions to recognize the truth. I go to the last paragraph. The Jew slaughtered in one night 75,000 people. When he emigrated from Egypt, he killed all the firstborn. That is, a whole future generation of Egyptians. What would have happened if the Jew had succeeded in driving the nations into war against us, and if we had lost the war? The Jew, protected by foreign bayonets, would have fallen on us and would have slaughtered and murdered us. Never forget what history has taught us. My Lord, after the November demonstrations, irregularities occurred in the Gau of Franconia in connection with the organized Aryanization of Jewish property. Aryanization of Jewish property was, of course, regulated by the state, and under a decree it had been laid down that the proceeds, or any proceeds that there might be, from taking over Jewish properties and giving them to Aryans, all such proceeds were to go to the state. What apparently happened in Franconia was that a good deal of the proceeds never found their way as far as the state, and as a result, Goering set up a commission to investigate what had taken place. We have the report of that commission, and I would refer the tribunal to certain short passages in it. On page 45, we see from that report exactly what had been taking place in this defendant Streicher's Gau. I quote from under the words the 9th and 10th of November. Lord, I read from the center of that page 45 of the document book. Following upon the November demonstrations, the deputy Gau leader Holtz took up the Jewish question. His reasons can be given here in detail on the basis of his statement of the 25th of March 1939, the 9th and 10th November 1938. In the night of the 9th and 10th November and on the 10th November 1938, events took place throughout Germany which I, and I emphasize that is Holtz speaking, I considered to be the signal for a completely different treatment of the Jewish question in Germany. Synagogues and Jewish schools were burnt down, and Jewish property was smashed both in shops and in private houses. Besides this, a large number of particular Jews were taken to concentration camps by the police. Towards midday, we discussed these events in the Gauleiter's house. All of us were of opinion that we now faced a completely new state of affairs on the Jewish question. By the great action against the Jews carried out in the night and morning of the 10th of November, all guiding principles and all laws on this subject had been made illusory. We were of the opinion, particularly myself, that we should now act on our own initiative in this respect. I proposed to the Gauleiter that in view of the great existing lack of housing, the best thing would be to put the Jews into a kind of internment camp. And then the houses would become free in a twinkling, and the housing shortage would be relieved, at least in part. Besides that, we would have the Jews under control and supervision. I added, the same thing happened to our prisoners of war and war internees. The Gauleiter said that this suggestion was, for the time being, impossible to carry out. Thereupon I made a new proposal to him. I said to him that I considered it unthinkable that after the Jews had had their property smashed, they should continue to be able to own houses and land. I proposed that these houses and this land ought to be taken away from them, and declared myself ready to carry through such an action. I declared that by the Aryanization of Jewish land and houses, a large sum could accrue to the Gau out of the proceeds. I named some millions of marks. I stated that in my opinion, this Aryanization could be carried out as legally as the Aryanization of shops. The Gauleiter's answer was something to this effect. If you think you can carry this out, do so. The sum gained will then be used to build a Gau school. I go down now to opposite where it says page 18. The Aryanization was accomplished by the alienation of properties, the surrender of claims, especially mortgage claims, and reductions in buying price. The payment allowed the Jews was basically 10% of the nominal value or nominal sum of the claim. As a justification for these low prices, Holtz claimed that at the Berlin meeting of the 6th of February 1939, that the Jews had mostly bought their property during the inflation period for 1/10 of its value. As has been shown by investigating a large number of individual cases selected at random, this claim is not true. Lord, I would turn to page 48 of the document book, which appears in the second part of this report, and which sets out that part of the report is really the part containing the findings of the Commission. I quote from the top of the page 48 of the document book. This is still part of the report. It is, in fact, as I say, the findings of the report.
It is what?
It's the findings of the report.
Yes.
The findings of the Commission. A Gauleiter Streicher likes to beat people with a riding whip, but only if he is in the company of several persons assisting him. Usually the beatings are carried out with sadistic brutality. The best known case is that of Steinruck, whom he beat bloodily in the prison cell, together with Deputy Gauleiter Holtz and SA Brigadier General Koenig. After returning from this scene to the Deutscher Hof, he said, "Now I am relieved. I needed that again." Later, he also stated several times that he needed another Steinruck case in order to relieve himself. In August 1938, he beat Editor Berker at the district house, together with district office leader Scholler. and his adjutant Koenig. On the 2nd of December 1938, he asked to have 3 youthful criminals, 15 to 17 years old, who had been arrested for robbery, brought to the room of the director of the criminal police office in Nuremberg first. Streicher, who was accompanied by his son Lothar, had the boys brought in singly and questioned them about their sex life, and in particular, through clear and detailed questioning, he laid stress on determining whether and since when they masturbated. I quote the last 2 lines of that paragraph. The last one of these 3 boys he beat with his riding whip, with blows on the head and on the rest of the body. And to show the authority and power that he held in his Gau, I refer to the last paragraph on that page. According to reports of reliable witnesses, Gauleiter Streicher is in the habit of pointing out on the most varied occasions that he alone gives orders in the district of Franconia. For instance, at a meeting in the Colosseum in Nuremberg in 1935, he said that nobody could remove him from office. In a meeting at Hercules Hall, where he described how he had beaten Professor Steinruck, he emphasized that he would not let himself be beaten by anybody, not even by an Adolf Hitler. For this also must be stated here, in Franconia, the Gau acts first and then orders the absolutely powerless authorities to approve. Lord, both those volumes of that report will become GB 175. Whether or not as a result of, I beg your lordship.
But one isn't altogether satisfied that that has any bearing upon the case against Streicher?
My Lord, the object of that document is this, to show the kind of treatment and persecution which the Jews were receiving in the district or Gau, over which this defendant ruled, and secondly, to show the absolute authority with which this defendant acted in his district. That's the purpose of that, sir. On the, as a result, either of that investigation or of some other matter, the defendant was relieved of his position as Gauleiter in February 1940. But he did not cease from his propaganda or from the control of his newspaper. I would only quote one further short extract from the Der Stürmer, an article written by him on the 4th of November 1943, which appears on the document book at page 53, is PS 1965 and becomes GB 176. And it is an extract of importance. It is really the truth that the Jews, so to speak, have disappeared from Europe, and that the Jewish reservoir of the East, from which the Jewish plague has for centuries beset the peoples of Europe, has ceased to exist. However, the Führer of the German people at the beginning of the war prophesied what has now come to pass. Lord, that article was signed by Streicher, and it is my submission that it shows that he had knowledge of what was going on in the East, of which this court has had such hideous evidence. That was written November 1943. In April 43, tribunal will remember the Warsaw Ghetto was destroyed. Between April 1942 and April 1944, 1,700,000 odd Jews were killed in Auschwitz and Birkenau. I quote now from the transcript. Throughout the whole of that period, millions of Jews were dying. And it is my submission that that article signed by him, appearing on the 4th of November, shows that he knew what was happening. Perhaps not the details, but he knew that the Jews were being exterminated. I leave the Stürmer, and I would draw the attention of the tribunal quite shortly to a matter which is perhaps as evil as any other aspect of this man's activity, and that is the particular attention that he paid to the instruction, if you can so call it, or the perversion of the children and the youth of Germany. He was not content with inciting the grown-up population. He seized the children as early as he could at their schools, and he started to poison their minds at the earliest possible date. Already in some of the extracts that I have referred to, tribunal will remember that there are mentions of children and the need for teaching them anti-Semitism. I refer now to page 54 of the document book, and I would quote 4 or 5 lines from the last paragraph, starting in the middle of the last paragraph. It's a report of a speech by Streicher as early as June 1925, when he says, "I repeat, we demand the transformation of the school into a national German institute of education."
Where are you reading?
From the last paragraph on page 54 of the Lordship's
yes,
document.
I see. Yes.
Center of the paragraph. We demand the transformation of the school into a national German institute of education. If we let German children be taught by German teachers, then we shall have laid the foundations for the national German school. This national German school must teach racial doctrine. And I go to the last line of the first paragraph on the following page. We demand, therefore, the introduction of racial doctrine into the school. That is in a copy of the Stürmer which has been already put in. It is GB 165. The following document is an extract from the Frankfurter Tageszeitung of the 19th of March 1934, when he addressed a girls' school at the passing out ceremony after their finishing their vocational course. He was continually holding children's meetings and attending children's schools. I quote the 3rd paragraph. Then Julius Streicher spoke about his life and told them about a girl who at one time went to his school and who fell for a Jew and was finished for the rest of her life. I needn't read the rest, it's all in the same tone. I read the last paragraph only. I think I can omit the whole of the rest of that. That becomes GB 177. Every summer, they celebrated in Nuremberg what they called their solstice celebrations, some pagan rites, where the youth of Nuremberg rallied, organized, or at least encouraged by the defendant Streicher. On page 58 of the document book is a report taken from his paper Frankische Tageszeitung of his speech to the Hitler youth on what they called the Holy Mountain near Nuremberg on the 22nd of June 1935. Boys and girls, look back a little more than 10 years ago. A great war, the World War, had whirled over the peoples of the earth and had left in the end a heap of ruins. Only one people remained victorious in this dreadful war, a people of whom Christ said its father is the devil. That people had ruined the German nation in body and soul. Then Adolf Hitler, unknown to anybody, arose from among the people and became the voice which called to a holy war, a holy war and battle. He cried to the people for everybody to take courage again and to rise and give a helping hand to take the devil from the German people, so that the human race might be free again from these people that have wandered about the world for centuries and millennia, marked with the sign of Cain. Boys and girls, even if they say that the Jews were once the chosen people, do not believe it, but believe us when we say that the Jews are not a chosen people, because it cannot be that a chosen people should act among the peoples as the Jews do today. And so on with similar kind of propaganda. That document will be GB 178. The next document to which from which I will not read now, the tribunal will see that it was a report of Streicher's address to 2,000 children at Nuremberg at Christmas time, 1936. Underlined, it says, "Do you know who the devil is?" he asked his breathlessly listening audience. "The Jew, the Jew," resounded from 1,000 children's voices. But he wasn't content only with writing and talking. That becomes, I beg your pardon, a GB 179. He was not content with talking and meeting them and writing. He actually issued a book for teachers. I have that book. A book which he published from his Disturmer offices called The Jewish Question and School Instruction. I have not had the whole of that book translated. It is addressed to school teachers. It's intended for their benefit, and it emphasizes the necessity of anti-Semitic teaching in schools, and it suggests ways in which the subject can be introduced and handled. On page 60 of the document book, the tribunal will see a few extracts which have been taken from that book. The preface, part of it is as follows: the National Socialist state brought fundamental changes into all spheres of life of the German people. It has also presented the German teacher with some new tasks. The National Socialist state demands that its teachers instruct German children in social questions. As far as the German people is concerned, the racial question is a Jewish question. Those who want to teach the child all about the Jew must themselves have a thorough knowledge of the subject. I would quote from the paragraph opposite page 5 in the margin. The whole of the rest of the extracts are really suggestions for teachers as to how to introduce the Jewish subject into their teaching. And page 5, the introduction. Racial and Jewish questions are the fundamental problems of the National Socialist ideology. The solution of these problems will secure the existence of National Socialism, and with this the existence of our nation for all time. The enormous significance of the racial question is recognized almost without exception today by all the German people. In order to attain this recognition, our people had to travel through a long road of suffering. I read from the towards the end of the last paragraph, the first paragraph, the preface. Those who take to heart all that has been written with such feeling by Fritz Fink, who for many years has been greatly concerned about the German people, will be grateful to the creator of this outwardly insignificant publication. Then it's signed by Julius Streicher, city of the Reich Party rallies, Nuremberg, in the year 1937. But I only omitted that last part in the interest of time.
Yes.
That book is GB 180. I would just read the last 2 lines, which I wasn't able to read before Mr. Marx interposed. Last 3 lines of the paragraph under introduction. No one should be allowed to grow up in the midst of our people without this knowledge of the monstrous character and dangerousness of the Jew. I will not occupy the time of the tribunal by reading further from that book. The nature of the book, I hope, is clear. I would only refer to the last 3 lines on the next page in the document book, taking another extract from it. One who has reached this stage of understanding will inevitably remain an enemy of the Jews all his life, and will instill this hatred into his own children. The Stürmer did publish also some children's books. So that it may be quite clear, I'm not alleging that the defendant himself wrote the books, but they were published from his publishing business. And they are, of course, on the same line as everything else that was published and issued from that business. The first of them, to which I would call attention, was entitled in English, or the translation, in English translation is as follows: Don't trust the fox in the green meadow, nor the Jew on his oath. It is a picture book. May I have it? It is a picture book for children, with pictures, all of them offensive pictures depicting Jews, of which a variety of selection appears in the tribunal's book which follows. And opposite each picture there is a little story. On page 62 of the document book, the tribunal will see the kind of thing which appears opposite each picture. On page 6 of the book, we find opposite the first picture in the tribunal's document book of a very unpleasant-looking Jew butcher cutting up some meat. Jesus Christ says the Jew is a murderer through and through. And when Christ had to die, the Lord did not know any other people who would have tortured him to death. So he chose the Jews. That is why the Jews pride themselves on being the chosen people. I beg your pardon. I think I was wrong in saying that occurred opposite the first picture. That is another extract from the book. The writing opposite the first picture is as follows. The Jewish butcher. He sells half refuse instead of meat. A piece of meat lies on the floor and the cat claws another. This doesn't worry the Jewish butcher, since the meat increases in weight. Besides, one mustn't forget he won't have to eat it himself. Well, again, in the interest of time, it isn't perhaps worth quoting the contents of that book any further. The tribunal can see the type of book it is, the type of filthy teaching that it was instilling into the minds of the children. The pictures speak for themselves. The second picture is a rather beastly picture of a girl being led away by a Jew. On the next page we see the defendant smiling benignly at apparently a children's party, greeting the little children. The next picture depicts copies of the Disturmer posted on a wall with children looking at them. The next picture perhaps requires little explanation. It is a picture of Jewish children being taken away from an Aryan school, led away by a very unpleasant-looking father, presumably, and all the Aryan children shouting and dancing and enjoying the fun very much. That book becomes GB 181. My Lord, I had finished describing that one children's book. There is a similar book called The Poisonous Fungus, which has in fact been put in evidence already. It is a book very much the same in character and appearance, and is numbered US 257. It was put in evidence, but it was not read to the tribunal. And I would read one of the short stories from that book because it shows perhaps more strikingly, I think, than any other extract to which we've referred, of the revolting way in which this man poisoned the mind of his listeners and readers. It's a book of pictures, again with short stories, and page 69 of the document book shows one of the pictures, a girl sitting in a Jewish doctor's waiting room. Lord, it's not a very pleasant story, but he's not a very pleasant man. And it's only by reading these things that it becomes possible to believe the kind of education that the German children have been receiving over these years, headed by this man. I quote from the story. Inga, that is the girl. Inga sits in the reception room of the Jew doctor. She has to wait a long time. She looks through the journals which are on the table, but she is much too nervous to read even a few sentences. Again and again she remembers the talk with her mother, and again her mind reflects on the warnings of her leader of the League of German Girls. A German must not consult a Jew doctor, and particularly not a German girl. Many a girl that went to a Jew doctor to be cured found disease and disgrace. When Inga had entered the waiting room, she experienced an extraordinary incident. From the doctor's consulting room, she could hear the sound of crying. She heard the voice of a young girl. "Doctor, doctor, leave me alone." Then she heard the scornful laughing of a man. And then all of a sudden it became absolutely silent. Inga had listened breathlessly. What may be the meaning of all this, she asked herself, and her heart was pounding. And again she thought of the warning of her leader in the League of German Girls. Inga was already waiting for an hour. Again she takes the journals in an endeavor to read. Then the door opens. Inga looks up. The Jew appears. She screams. In terror she drops the paper. Horrified she jumps up. Her eyes stare into the face of the Jewish doctor. And this face is the face of the devil. In the middle of this devil's face is a huge crooked nose. Behind the spectacles, two criminal eyes. And the thick lips are grinning, a grinning that expresses, "Now I got you at last, you little German girl." And then the Jew approaches her. His fleshy fingers stretch out after her. But now Inga has composed herself. Before the Jew can grab hold of her, she smacks the fat face of the Jew doctor with her hand. One jump to the door. Breathlessly, Inga runs down the stairs. Breathlessly, she escapes the Jew house. No comment is almost unnecessary on a story like that, read by children of the age which are going to read the books that you see. Another picture which I have included in the book is a picture, of course, of the defendant with his youthful admirers standing round looking at it. And the script opposite that picture, which appears on page 70 of the document book, includes the words, and I quote from the one but last paragraph, "Without a solution of the Jewish question, there will be no salvation for mankind." The actual page is an account of how some boys attended one of his speeches. That is what he shouted at us. All of us could understand him. And when at the end he shouted, "Sieg Heil for the Führer," we all acclaimed him with tremendous enthusiasm. For 2 hours Streicher spoke at that occasion. To us it appeared to have been but a few minutes. One can begin to see the effect that all this was having from the columns of the Die Stürmer itself. In April 1936, there appears only one letter from many, many others that appeared in other copies from children of all ages. I quote the third paragraph of this letter. It's a letter signed by the boys and girls of the National Socialist Youth Hostel across Mervyn. Today we saw a play on how the devil persuades the Jew to shoot a conscientious National Socialist. In the course of the play, the Jew did it too. We all heard the shot. We would all have liked to jump up and arrest the Jew. But then the policeman came and after a short struggle took the Jew along. You can imagine, dear Stürmer, that we heartily cheered the policeman. In the whole play, not one name was mentioned. But we all knew that this play represented the murder of the Jew Frankfurter. We were very sick when we went to bed that night, and none felt like talking to the others. This play made it clear to us how the Jew sets to work. And Lord, that is already in, as I've said, it is GB 170. To conclude, I would only draw the attention of the tribunal again to his authority as a Gauleiter. It appears from the organization book of the NSDAP for 1938, which is already in as an exhibit, US 430. In speaking or describing the duties and authority of Gauleiters, the Gauleiter bear overall responsibility to the Führer for the sector of sovereignty entrusted to him. The rights, duties, and jurisdiction of the Gauleiter result primarily from the mission assigned by the Führer, and apart from that, from detailed directive. His association with the Führer and with the other defendants, or some of the other defendants, again can be seen from the newspapers. On the occasion of his 50th birthday, Hitler paid a visit to Nuremberg to congratulate him. And that was on the 13th of February, 1935. The account of that meeting is published in the Völkischer Beobachter of that date, and I quote as follows. Adolf Hitler spoke to his old comrades in battle and to his followers in words which went straight to their hearts. By way of introduction, he remarked that it was a special pleasure to be present for a short while in Nuremberg, the town of National Socialist community, which had been steeled in battle at this day of honor of Julius Streicher, and to be within the circle of the standard bearers of National Socialist idea during many years. Just as they, all of them, had, during the years of oppression, unshakably believed in the victory of the movement, so his friend and comrade in battle, Streicher, had stood faithfully at his side at all times. It had been this unshakable belief that had moved mountains. For Streicher, it would surely be a solemn thought that this 50th anniversary meant not only the halfway point of a century, but also of 1,000 years of German history to him. He had in Streicher a companion of whom he could say that here in Nuremberg was a man who would never waver for a single second, and who would unflinchingly stand behind him in every situation. That becomes GB 182. The next document is a letter from Himmler, published in the Der Stürmer of April 1937, which becomes GB 2 US. It is already US 258, the copy of the paper. If in future years the history of the reawakening of the German people is written, and if already the next generation will be unable to understand that the German people was once friendly to the Jews, it will be stated that Julius Streicher and his weekly paper, Der Stürmer, have contributed a great deal towards the enlightenment regarding the enemy of humanity. Signed for the Reichsführer SS Himmler. And lastly, that becomes, I'm told, US 260. A lot of these documents are already in the bound volumes. And lastly, we have a letter from Baldur von Scherer, the Reich youth leader, published in the Stürmer of January 1938. It is the historical merit of the Stürmer to have enlightened the broad masses of our people in a popular way as to the Jewish world danger. Stürmer is right in refusing to fulfill its task in the tone of the aesthetic drawing room. Jury has shown no regard for the German people. We have, therefore, no cause to be considerate and to spare our worst enemy. What we fail to do today, our youngsters of tomorrow will have to suffer for bitterly. Lord, it may be that this defendant is less directly involved in the physical commission of the crimes against Jews, of which this tribunal has heard, than some of his co-conspirators. The submission of the prosecution is that his crime is no less the worse for that reason. No government in the world, before the Nazis came to power, could have embarked upon and put into effect a policy of mass extermination in the way in which they did, without having a people who would back them and support them, and without having a large number of people, men and women, who were prepared to put their hands to their bloody murder. Not even perhaps the German people of previous generations would have lent themselves to the crimes about which this tribunal has heard, killing of millions and millions of men and women. It was to the task of educating that people, of producing murderers, educating and poisoning them in hate, that Streicher set himself. And for 25 years, he has continued unrelentingly the education, if you can call it so, or the perversion of the people and of the youth of Germany. And he has gone on and on as he saw the results of his work bearing fruit. In the early days, he was preaching persecution. As they took place, he preached extermination and annihilation. And as we have seen, as the ghettos of the East and millions of Jews were being exterminated and annihilated, he cried out for more and more. That is the crime that he has committed in the submission of the prosecution, that he made these things possible, made these crimes possible which they would never have been had it not been for him and for those like him. And he led the propaganda and the education of the German people in those ways. Without him, the Kaltenbrunners, the Himmlers, the General Stroops would have had nobody to do their orders. And as we have seen, he has concentrated upon the youth, the childhood of Germany. In its extent, his crime probably is greater and more far-reaching than that of any of the other defendants. The misery that they caused finished with their incarceration. The effects of this man's crime, the poison that he has put into the minds of millions and millions of young boys and girls and young men and women now, it goes on. He leaves behind him a legacy of almost a whole people, poisoned with hate, sadism, and murder. Perverted by him, that people remain a problem and perhaps a menace for the rest of civilization for generations to come. Lord, in the submission of the prosecution, the case against this man as set out in the indictment is proved.